Wisdom requires to bring the mind and the heart together. It requires emotional intelligence. It requires empathy. And for that, we need stories and the art of storytelling.
If you read a variety of novels by a variety of different people, you get a much deeper understanding of how the world works.
Not only are we the biggest thing affecting the planet, but we've suddenly reached a point where if we don't wake up to that and respond accordingly, it's going to come back and bite us really, really hard. And that moment is now.
So I think if you can just reach out to somebody, to that isolated person, whether it's in your office or within your community, you could really change someone's life and maybe improve your own.
The atmosphere here is always of people who love books, longing to see a book, an event, an author that they love, and it's just palpable, it's wonderful.
I've been to book festivals over the world. This is the best. This is the gold standard for book festivals.
Hello and welcome to the Edinburgh International Book Festival. We are live today in the Edinburgh College of Art, and what a stunning view do I have behind me. I'm Naila Ahmed and I'll be your chair for today, and we also have BSL from Anna. I have the absolute honour of speaking to Gina Martin. Gina Martin is a campaigner, writer and speaker. In February 2019, her 18-month legal campaign to make upskirting a sexual offence in England and Wales was successful, and the Voyeurism Act was passed into law. 3 other countries have since followed suit, with Northern Ireland working towards the same. Gina was named the Praise Elite Law Award 2020, one of Time Magazine's #100 Next Influential People, as well as Stylish Remarkable Woman of the Year 2019. Gina writes for platforms such as Grazia, Stylist, The Telegraph and the World Economic Forum, among many others. And I'll be talking to Gina today about her book, Be the Change, a toolkit for the activist in you. This book is inspiring, it's practical and it's clear-eyed. I'm sure after reading this book, and maybe even after hearing our conversation today, you'll be ready to fight for what you believe in and take on the world. This year's online programme is Pay What You Can. If you're watching at home and enjoying this event, we'd love for you to make a donation. You can do so at the donate button below. If you would like to buy a copy of Gina's book, you can also do this online at shop.edbookfest.co.uk. And there's also a free learning resource relating to this event on our learning site, which is learning.edbookfest.co.uk. For today, Gina's going to kick us off with a reading, and then I'll ask some questions, and we will have time at the end for your questions. So please feel free to pop these in the chat and don't be shy. You can write your questions in pretty much at any point, and they will pop up for me on a magic tablet that I have. So yeah, hello Gina. It's really nice to be here with you.
Thanks for having me. I'm so sad I can't actually be there with you because I love coming to the book festival, and that view is
it's stunning, isn't it? Like, yeah. It's incredible.
It's incredible, but yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me. If anyone can hear my dog barking in the background, we're just going to ignore that for the entire event. Okay.
So would you like to kick us off with the reading then?
Yes, please. So this is from the prologue for my paperback. So I wrote this not long ago. And I'm just going to start because it's basically a good description of what I think activism, quote unquote, actually is. So it starts. If you think about it, activism is pretty simple. You identify something that bothers you and you try to fix it, but you don't have to go straight to the top and try to change a law. You can make vital change on a micro level too. Your issue can be something you've experienced or even a small part of a big issue you care about. Are you done with seeing everyone wearing wasteful fast fashion? Create a clothes swap initiative. Do you want to change a conversation around representation? Organise a stunt. If you care about ecological issues, start a fundraiser. You see, changing things isn't a feat only accomplished by what we consider remarkable people. It's a goal that's doable if you have a bit of self-belief, determination, and know-how. And that's why I'm writing this book. I want you to know what campaigning is really like and how to kick ass at it. The very fact that you chose this book among all others and want to spend time here with me speaks volumes. You're already someone who wants to make the world a better place, and that's pretty remarkable. We need more people like you. That interest in society's progression is the only thing you can't teach. Passion for change is all you need. Everything else you can learn as you go. There is no limit to what you can learn and achieve, and hopefully I can be a bit of a catalyst for that. By the time you've turned the last page of this book, you should feel ready to take on the world. I'll walk you through everything I've learned campaigning, teaching you every trick I picked up along the way. Whatever you want to fight for, this will be a supportive and helpful place to get started. Whether you need something to dip into to keep you on track, or you want to plan a campaign from start to finish but have no idea where to begin, it's all here. No jargon, no BS, just honest, practical advice and some of the tough and embarrassing lessons I've learned the hard way. How do you get a lawyer when you don't have any money? How do you get into the right spaces with the people who have the power to help? How do you take an online campaign offline? From starting out to seeing it through to the end, this is the definitive toolkit for enforcing change, because if I can do it, then my God, so can you. Let's do this.
Yay. If we were live, I'd be like clapping, and I'm sure, well, we are live, but if we had a live audience, I'm sure we'd all be clapping. I really love that in this book, it's very practical and it takes wider issues, or like how broad a campaign can seem, and it breaks it down into sort of little bits. And you do really feel like anybody could be an activist when you're reading it. I was wondering, before you became an activist, did you have like an image or an idea of what an activist was?
Yeah, I guess I did. I don't think I'd ever thought about it too much, because I was quite interested generally in people who fought for people's rights, and I always kind of found that quite interesting. I used to watch documentaries and stuff about it, and I always used to like sign every petition I could, and I was just like that growing up. But I think I thought that to be an activist, quote unquote, because there's so much weight to that word and we only use it with certain people, and it's almost like there's almost a kind of cultural thing where it feels like you have to earn that word, when that's actually not true at all, because most of our rights as working people have come from regular people just starting to do something because they didn't have a choice and they needed to, or because they wanted to and they were regular people. And I don't think I had that image in my head when I started. I think I was thinking about the way that the media and mainstream media portrays an activist, which is like this super remarkable person that has something in them that other people don't, and they're more resilient than everyone else, and they can like go out there and they can like force, which I think often is how people perceive me before they meet me. And then I talk to them and they go, oh, okay, anyone can do it. And like, yeah, that's the whole point. But yeah, I felt like a remarkable person that was kind of unshakable, full of knowledge. And maybe I also I think I was a bit insecure about my academic level when I was younger, because I was very average in school, and I thought you had to be super, super intellectual and super academic to do activism or campaigning. And the longer I've done it, the more I've realized it's actually not about that at all. The reason why activism works, and why activists, whether they choose to call themselves that or not, but people who are active in their communities and in their society in changing things, the reason why it works is because they are regular people who understand the issues, because they live them every single day. Yeah. And that's the key. It's not about being this person who's removed from the average person, whatever that means. It's just about being whoever you are, because that's why it works, because everyone works together. That's the whole point.
Yeah. And you had a personal experience which was a catalyst for your campaigning journey. And that happened when you were upskirted. So what happened?
That was, I think it's weird, because that wasn't actually even my first, that wasn't like I think often it can be thought of as like a thing that happened in my life, and it was like the first thing that happened, and I thought, I'm just going to go and do something. But it was actually a bit of the straw that broke the camel's back. It was kind of the last thing that happened that I was happy to just palm off. Effectively, I went to a family festival in London, British Summertime Festival, and I'd been living in Greece for a year, working on little boats for literally no money. And I'd just come back to London. I hadn't seen my sister in like a year and a half. And so I went to this festival, super excited. And it was daytime, and, you know, it was a really lovely environment. And I was waiting for a band to come on stage. I was waiting for the Killers to come on stage, and a group of guys were like standing behind me and my sister, and they were sort of hitting on us, but we said no a bunch of times and they wouldn't really stop. And that's when I get really frustrated, because I feel like it should be enough that I say, no, I'm not interested, and they should stop. They wouldn't stop, and then eventually I felt one of them, it was about 5 minutes later, one of them brushed up against me, and I didn't really think much of it because obviously I was in a crowd of about 60,000 people, and that's the way it was pre-COVID times. You're up against everyone. And then I saw a bunch of them laughing, and I could feel that they were laughing at me, but I didn't really know why. And then I looked around the side of a guy who was in front of me, and he was on his phone, and he had a photo on WhatsApp that he'd been sent. I actually didn't realize this at the time. I thought he'd taken it because everything was happening so fast.
Yeah.
But he'd been sent it from another guy, and it was up my skirt, and it was a really well taken photo. It was literally like a few inches from my crotch, and it was a horrible photo. And I just knew it was me instantly, and I grabbed the phone off him, and we got into like a bit of a scuffle. And then a bunch of people in the crowd helped me get away, and I ran to security with the phone, and they called the police. Police came, kind of looked at the photo because they had to see it, make sure it was me, and kind of said, "Oh, there's not much we can do about it. I'm sorry, you won't hear much from us." And then they just said, like, "Go and enjoy your night." And they didn't even kick the guys out. And I remember I was so embarrassed and humiliated and devastated by the whole thing. I didn't clock some of the details on the day of, hang on a second. So like, if I was like a 13-year-old girl, would you have said the same? Why won't I hear from you? Why isn't there much you can do? Why are the guys still in the festival? All this stuff. Yeah. And then I went home and started looking into law, and I kind of found out that upskirting as an action didn't exist in English and Welsh law. It didn't really exist in British law. The language didn't exist, and there was a loophole in the law, and I started to try and figure out how to solve that.
Yeah. And it took 18 months to get the law changed. So what was that process like?
Yeah, it was a long time. It started off with I'm from a background of marketing, so I used to work in advertising as a copywriter and an art director. So I kind of employed all the skills that I have from marketing and advertising, like how to sell, an alcohol brand through social media marketing. Okay, well, if you can make someone care about that, then you can make someone care about an issue. So I started figuring out how to use all those skills and start asking the question, why is this not a sexual offence? And starting to get people interested in the concept of why it wasn't. And I started contacting and finding a lot of other people who've been through the same thing. And it was everyone from, elderly women who had been upskirted in shops to 12-year-old girls who were upskirted in school and their teacher wasn't arrested. He'd been doing it for years, and they found thousands of photos of upskirting pictures of kids, and he wasn't arrested. He was just fired, and he went back to his, £500,000 house. And so all these stories started to build up, and I was like, oh, okay, this is actually about me. This isn't about getting my case sorted. This is about helping all of these other people who've been through this and kind of coming together as a community and figuring out what we can do all together. So I started the social media campaign, and then I took all those numbers from social, which is the great thing about social. You can see how many people you're reaching and all that stuff, all the analytics. And I took that to traditional media companies, so like TV and producers and stuff, and said, look, how many people are interested in this? Would you talk about it? Not really thinking I'd be the one to do it, thinking they might have like a debate or a discussion. But obviously, with having gone through it, I sort of became the person talking about it because I had that perspective. And did media there, and then was like, oh, I need to get a lawyer, because I was realizing that awareness was great, but it wasn't going to change or create a safety net for people. It was just going to make people more aware of it happening, but how did they get justice, quote unquote? So then I've got a lawyer pro bono, talked to a bunch of different lawyers, and then eventually I took that law campaign, which is effectively us writing new legislation and talking to all legal authorities in the UK and figuring out how can we do this realistically. Figured all that out, and then took it to Parliament, so that when we went to Parliament, we weren't being like, you need to solve this. We were being like, we've done all the heavy lifting. Would you sign this off to lots of different MPs? And that political process took, that was most of the time. I guess it was almost like 15 months in Parliament trying to get MPs to back it. We had a number of bills, some of them failed, and then eventually went through with the government bill. And the whole time, a lot of that work was getting the public educated on the issue, getting them passionate about the issue, and then turning that passion into political momentum and pressure on the government, which at the time was Theresa May. So it was huge. And I was working full time the whole time. I was working in advertising 9 till 6 every day. I was getting up at 5 a.m, doing it before work, definitely doing it in work. And my bosses definitely knew I was doing it in work. And then leaving my job and doing it till 1 a.m. And it was just full on. I don't really know how I did it, to be honest.
Yeah, well done. You must have been shattered.
Oh, yeah, beyond.
In the book, you talked about the fact that you had identified this issue and you were thinking like, well, who's going to solve this? And you had this moment where you realised that it could be you. So
Yeah.
what was that moment like when you realised that you were going to be like the face of this campaign and that you were going to be driving for it?
Scary.
Yeah.
That was a scary moment because there's a very, we like to say it's small, but unfortunately it's not. There's a large subset of men who don't like women who put their heads above the parapet and start talking about things that are happening to them. There's a lot of people that are uncomfortable with conversations about sexual assault. It's a very, very sensitive issue. And there was a lot of survivors I was working with, and I had to be really responsible and like try and make it feel productive and safe. And they were telling me their stories, and I was on global news channels, and so it was really scary. There was a lot of responsibility that came with it. It was also scary because I was just scared of being put out in the public, because obviously this thing had just happened, and I didn't want the very guys who had done that to me to see me, and then it was very nerve-wracking. But at the same time, there's a sense of duty, I think, with those things or there is for me, where it feels like I have marketing experience. I'm a copywriter and art director. I know how to get people to care about an issue. I've got this far with a social media campaign, and now they want me to do it on the news and go on the news and do all this stuff. And it's like, well, if this had happened to a 15-year-old girl who can't even vote yet, doesn't have a democratic voice, probably doesn't have the opportunity and the resources to be able to get out there and get people to care about it. It felt like I'd been put in a bit of a position. It was like, I have to do something with this now, because there's been too many times throughout my life where I've like brushed stuff off, and it's happened so often. And any woman, girl, marginalised gender, anyone who's watching this will understand that feeling of brushing something off because of being overtly sexualised, or because of male violence or whatever. And you just, you let it go because you're too scared to fight it, because fighting it is like a re-traumatization almost. You have to constantly tell your own story, and so I've done that. I did that my whole, teenage years and my early 20s. And I think this time was just a bit like, I'm not doing that again. Like I don't even know if I will be able to get this in any way to a point of, because I wasn't trying to change the law at the beginning. That came later when I got a lawyer and they said, you could possibly do this. And I went, okay, I'll do that then. I guess I'll do that. I never allowed myself to think that far ahead. But there was a sense of, I'll just go as far as I can. And that's what activism is that I might get this far, and then another activist might be able to come in and work and build on my work in years to come. It's not just about me finishing it. It's about putting the hours in so that, I'm putting the water into the bucket, and at some point it'll overflow, and it might not even be me that does it. But it was also a form of closure, I think, to be able to take back some of that power and take back some of that power that I felt I'd lost in that moment, and that kind of humiliation, and go, you're not allowed to do that to me anymore. I'm sorry. There's been too many times where that's happened. So yeah, it was scary when I decided to do it, but it was also slightly empowering, because it felt like, oh, this time I'm not brushing it off. I'm going to actually try and do something with this.
Yeah. What have been some of the results of the Voyeurism Act coming into place?
Well, I mean, I guess one of the most interesting results for me, and I think it's because of the narrative during the campaign, is the first men who were prosecuted were convicted paedophiles. And me and Ryan, my lawyer, Ryan Whelan from Gibson Dunn, which was my law firm, we knew that upskirting was almost, quote unquote, a gateway assault. Like it's a part of the spectrum of sexual assault. It's one action, but it often is used to push boundaries, and then other actions will follow it that are even worse. And it's also often in conjunction, because all these things are connected with other forms of assault. So I knew that it was happening to kids from the month after I started researching it, because that was what came to me. Kids came to me in droves. Young girls came to me because they felt like they could trust me with their stories. And so I knew that was a problem, and I knew that was a part of what the kind of threat we were dealing with. But it was very difficult to make people realize that it was a gateway action, because we see things in silos. We see things in boxes, like upskirting is one thing, and then sexual assault is one thing, and we don't give everything the complexity and nuance and the connection that it actually has and deserves. And so when the prosecution started coming in, which were pretty quick, because the education we'd done around the law was so massive and was so mainstream, because a law doesn't work if people don't know about it. We found that the first two men who prosecuted one was a convicted paedophile, and the second man we prosecuted, they found he was upskirting a young woman in a supermarket, and when they arrested him, they found 150,000 indecent images of children on his devices. So what that's done, I mean, it's quite pleasurable, because a lot of people were like, no, that's not a thing. It's not a gateway, assault. It's one thing. People do it for a laugh. It's a joke. It's a prank. Like sexual assault is ever a joke or a prank. It's not. And so when that happened, I was able to say, this is exactly what we were saying, is that it's a part of a continuum of violence that is happening to women and girls and people of marginalised genders all over the UK. And it's happening all the time. And it's not just one act. People don't do it once. And so those prosecutions, I was really proud, when it happened, that we were able to deal with people who are out there who are doing a lot of violent stuff to young women. And the upskirting law was a kind of a key to catching those perpetrators as well. Apart from that, we've had other campaigns in other countries. So in Germany, there was 2 activists called Ida and Hannah, who were students and young women, and they took on the law in Germany following my campaign. And so there's been quite a lot of I guess replication, which is great, because that's what you hope for when you put your work out there. People are going to use it and go further with it. France brought in the law as well, and then Northern Ireland are in the process of bringing in the law too, or bringing it into legislation to make it a sexual offence. So it's gone further and wider than I guess I thought. But I think that's the beautiful thing about activism, is that you put stuff into the world and you don't hold your cards close to your chest, because the whole point of it is to help people. And so the more people that take it on, the better, the further it goes. And it's nice. It's not mine anymore. It's kind of everyone's. And I love that.
We're all in it together, not to go full High School Musical.
Yes. We should do the dance right now.
If only I'd prepared it. I think it's really interesting to hear you talk about this, because often when people say experience sexual violence or other issues that are systematic, it can often be minimized, and you can be told, oh, just take it as a compliment, or it's just one thing, or other things like that. And actually it's like power plays such a big role.
Power is the biggest role player in all of this, because I think what we try and do, especially when we're talking about gendered violence, is you're right, we try and minimize it all the time. We try and label it as kind of the card you're dealt for existing as a woman or a femme or a girl in the world. And the reality is that there's no reason any of us should be going through this. It's not a kind of, it's not like a shark attack. It's not like, oh, it just kind of happens and there's nothing you can do about it. It's like, no, this is through history, through legislative choices, through social choices, through culture. It's been constructed throughout history, from male supremacy, from a world built and made for men and for masculinity. And it has been created, and now it is a problem we see in every single country across the globe. It's the one thing that unites us is gendered violence in every single country across the globe. There is not really a country where it doesn't happen. The only place you can really say it doesn't happen is when you're talking about indigenous populations and cultures where they have multiple genders, and gender doesn't play a huge factor. The gender binary doesn't play a huge factor in their culture. But we see it everywhere, and it's because it's a sickness, but it's constructed, it's created. And that's why I don't really have any time for the comebacks that minimize or distract, because we've seen throughout history socially constructed issues that have come through legislation, through history and through culture and through decisions made continuously day by day for hundreds of years. And we've seen them come to a head. We've seen them evolve. And we've also seen regular people go out and change parts of them, change legislation to create things that are safer and more opportunity for people, or go and change legislation that puts in markers so that people can talk about their injustices and get justice for their injustices, and talk to their workplace, or share their salaries, and then have transparency about how they're making all that kind of stuff. We've seen lots of different small changes, whether that's in industries or corporations, or whether that's national policies through legislation. And they've mostly been done by regular people. So the idea that it's just a way of life and that you can't change things really frustrates me, because if that was our mindset about everything, we'd never get anything done and nothing would get better. So I don't have time for that, because it's also, history has disproved that every month for about a century, because there's wonderful people changing things all the time. And the minimization, I think, as well, of especially survivors and people who've dealt with sexual violence, is also just a way for us, how do I put this in a gentle way, I guess, often the minimization comes from the community who are most perpetrating it, and that is often cis men. And when a community that is being subjugated in some way, or oppressed in some way, or is dealing with violence in some way, comes forward and tells an experience, the initial reaction from someone who belongs to a community who's perpetrating it is defense, effectively. You feel like, okay, we're talking about men here, so now I'm complicit, so therefore I have to defend myself because I don't want this feeling of shame and I don't want this feeling of being involved. So I'm going to defend myself in any way I can. And that's where we get the not all men, and that's where we get all these phrases that deflect and distract. But what I think we fail to see, especially in conversations about gender inequality, is that almost all the issues we're having across genders are coming from the same thing, and that's the gender binary, the very rigid construction of the gender binary in society. When we talk about men and their mental health, that suicide is the biggest killer of men under 40, a huge part of that is the way that we construct masculinity to be all about dominance, to be about being unemotional, to not have any soft qualities. That allows men to not have as much community and as much support systems and talk about their feelings and their worries and their fears as much as women can. And so the way that we construct both the gender binary, both genders in the gender binary, is actually dangerous to all of us. And so the moment that men engage in feminism and in conversations about sexual violence and in conversations about gendered violence, they're engaging in conversations about gender. And those conversations together are the things that get us through to start to solve all of the difficulties and the pain that are across lots of different genders. And yes, some genders are a priority because they're dealing with a lot more, and their pain is a lot more instant. It's, leave the house, I'm scared. It's, you're most likely to be hurt by a man in your life. It's all of those terrifying stats for women and girls. But there are also, men are not, thriving under the patriarchy either. So I think as soon as we start to talk about gender, if the less we can be defensive, the more we can just be open to it, realize it's not about us, it's much bigger and it's much more structural than just an interpersonal conversation and being complicit and defensive. I think we really start to get somewhere. And I've seen a lot of that in my work, and it gives you quite a lot of hope, to be honest.
Yeah. So talking about having an experience of, say, something that you may not have lived experience of, you do talk about this in the book when it comes to white privilege. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about white privilege and also about how you chose to structure that chapter, because you had your friend and activist, is it AJ Barber? Aja Barber edit it. So why did you make that choice to lay it out the way you did?
Yeah, so that chapter, I wanted to put something in there about, I guess, privileges, but, the most obvious privilege I have is white privilege, being racialized as white, and the innocence that affords me and the perception that I'm afforded because of my whiteness. So I wanted to put something in there about that. But I did list at the beginning a lot of my other privileges, because I think we hear the word privilege, right? And it's like thrown around all the time, and we don't actually specify which type of privilege we mean often. Mm-hmm. So, I wanted to kind of give a bit of an overview of all the different privileges I have, hoping that the reader would go, oh, so where are mine? Okay, so I'm, upper middle class, so that's a privilege. However, I come from a single parent family, and so I didn't have a supportive family structure, so that's something that's not a privilege. And kind of figure out, because we all have this kind of individual puzzle pieces with our privilege. And when I was writing that chapter, a big part, I guess, of learning and growing in the space of social justice issues is being able to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Being afforded enough compassion and space to be able to make mistakes, but still being held accountable. But I think as well online, we see a lot of this, like holding someone accountable.
Yeah.
And a lot of what that means often is like rushing, thousands of people who've never read a book on gender will go and rush to someone's Instagram and just call them out. And we don't really know what it means to hold someone accountable in a way that's actually productive for the movement and constructive. Mm-hmm. And so I think if we can get more comfortable with the idea of being okay with making mistakes publicly, and then coming off the back of those mistakes and having a real genuine conversation about why they were made and where we're going next, we'll be in a better position. So this chapter I wrote it as I wrote the rest of the book. And then I kind of looked around at the people around me who were part of the book journey with me. And I was like, okay, my publishing house is all white. My agency at the time that I was with were all white. And I was kind of worried, because I was like, there is no perspective. There is no diversity of thought on this book. Like, there was no one else coming in and reading this book, editing it and looking at it and seeing it through a critical lens. And so the white privilege section, obviously I felt like needed someone's eyes on it who who looks through the world through a critical lens, understands race, understands gender, and all those different types of things. And so Aja Barber was someone I followed at the time and I looked up to and definitely wanted to be friends with. And she's amazing. She wouldn't ever call herself an activist, but she's a writer, and she's got actually an amazing book out called Consumed coming out soon, which is all about consuming culture and fast fashion and colonialism and the way in which the West has pillaged the global South. And so she works a lot around these issues, which are feminist issues, because, you know, I think it's upwards of 80% of garment workers are women and girls. And so she was doing a lot around fashion and a lot of conversations around race and racism. And I was like, oh, it'd be really interesting to get her to look over this chapter, and any additions or edits or add-ins she wants to make, I'll just keep them in so you can see that she's made them.
Yeah.
Because I think there's something about me writing a chapter on white privilege and then getting to the end and it being like, great, Gina knows all of her stuff about white privilege. And it's like, well, no, not really, because with a book, you have an editor. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want her to make these changes and then they just go in there as if I wrote them, because I didn't write them. And so it was a bit of an exercise, I guess, in transparency of like how you learn from other people and how people can constructively correct you, because that's what she does to me in the chapter a bunch of times. She constructively corrects me and she calls me in. She doesn't call me out, she calls me in. And it felt like a really nice way to show that. So that's why I kept that chapter in with the amends from Aja, so that you can see how it's okay to, you know, miss things out or not be at a certain stage yet. And if you work with someone, it can be really constructive and really helpful.
I love that phrase, call me in. Like, I think that...
Yeah, that was actually Emma DeBerry who said that. I was on a panel with her in 2018 and she said, I think calling people in is probably a lot more constructive. And I remember being like, someone just changes a phrase and you're like, perfect.
So I'm just having a look at the questions and we don't have any in yet. So this is your wee note for those watching at home, that if you do have questions, please send them in. So what advice do you have for people wanting to pick a cause?
My number one advice, I think, is you have to pick something that's actually your experience or part of your life. Because I think we very easily, there's a commodification of activism that's happening a lot in the mainstream. You know, H&M's window displays are like people with placards and like change the world, even though they don't pay their garment workers a living wage. So we're really getting to a point where the kind of aesthetic of activism is seen as activism itself, and it's not.
Yeah.
And so I think with that in mind, it's really important that we see activism as something that comes from you, something you can't help but do. You either want to stop something or you want to start something, and you really, really want to do it because it's going to change people's lives around you or your life. So it comes from inside you. It's like a passion thing. It's not, I'm going to go out there and become an activist. That's a job, because you will lose money and you won't make money from activism. You will fund it yourself and you'll struggle and you'll eat rice for a couple of weeks. And so I think it has to be something from your experience. The reason why the upskirting thing was successful, whatever that means, you know, was because I'd been through it. Yeah. And so I brought a perspective that no one, you know, majority of people that I was working with in Parliament could bring, mostly because, you know, they're men, but also because they just don't exist in the world in the same way I do. Mm-hmm. And so I brought a perspective, and therefore the solutions and the legislation worked properly because it came from a point of absolute knowledge and a place of nuance and a place of experience. Even small things like, you know, the conversation around upskirting when I was in Parliament was very gendered. We were always talking about women. And yes, women are a majority of the people who are upskirted. But there was also a lot of trans people who are getting in touch with me saying that cis people have a morbid fascination with their bodies. And so they're being photographed often because they're trying to find out what their genitals look like, which is abhorrent and disgusting. And so the legislation that we brought through, you know, is gender neutral. Anyone can use it. Mm-hmm. And so talking about it as well, it was important for me to talk with that language so that people knew that they were included in it too. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have maybe learnt all that quickly if I hadn't have been in contact with so many people who had been through it and had so many real stories. So I think if you can pick something that comes from your life, your belly, you know, something that's to do with your family or something that you've been through or something that has stopped you, something that's been a difficulty in your life that isn't a difficulty in other people's lives, you know, that then you come from a place of authenticity and you're more likely to be successful as well, because campaigning is really hard and organising is really hard and it's exhausting and there's no praise for it. you know, until you achieve the thing that you're set out to achieve. And sometimes you don't, and that's fine. But it's basically secret work is what activism is. And you need passion to get through it. You can't, if you look around and try and pick something to change, you're very likely to run out of the passion because it gets so hard. But if you are working on something that comes from your belly that you're so annoyed about. I always say to my friends, like, what's the thing that you can't stop talking to people after you've had a drink? And they're like, we get it. You know,
Yeah.
Shut up. We're trying to have a nice time. You're like, but you just don't understand. Like that, those kind of things that you just can't stop. You won't run out of passion very easily with those things because they're part of your story. And you can't stop. So I think choose something that's from your life, from your experience and from your story. And that will mean you're mostly that you're more successful, but more importantly, that you're the right person to tell the story, because we can't get to a point where lots of people are choosing and picking and choosing things to solve because they're not best placed to solve them.
So we do have some questions from people watching along. So Lawrence asks, do you think becoming an activist or generally standing up for what you believe in can be dangerous? Have you experienced trolling? How would you recommend a young person can protect themselves against this?
Yes, it can be dangerous. I think there's always a risk when you stand up for something, and depending on who you are in the world, there's more of a risk. So, you know, for example, I can call myself an activist if I want to. I struggle with that phrase a lot, I guess, because it's more a way for people to understand what I do. Because I think if I explain what I do, it's like I just agitate people until they change something, and that's not really a understandable role. So activism makes it easier for people to understand my job. But if I call myself an activist, and the reason I struggle with it is because calling yourself an activist for women globally is a death sentence. Like, there are women all over the world who cannot even call themselves that because they will get killed by the state, or they will be in grave danger. So being an activist looks incredibly different depending on where you are in the world and who you are. And even here, the words that surrounded the, you know, pictures and articles about me during the campaign in newspapers were very supportive. I have peers who are doing similar work in different areas, but similar work, and are doing it in similar ways to I do. But they're not supported because their campaigns are about racial injustice in the UK, and the state doesn't want to recognise it. And so they're not getting the column inches that I got, they're not getting the support I got, and they're not afforded the same amount of support and I guess the same amount of legitimacy that I was given because I'm a slim white woman who was talking about sexual assault. So it can be very difficult, and it can be dangerous because of online abuse, which I got a lot of during the campaign. And that's, you know, so hard to deal with. I think harder than people realise to deal with. And there's not enough support for that online for women and girls. There just isn't. But, you know, in our culture, that's one reason why it's dangerous. But depending on who you are in Britain, it can be a lot more dangerous for other reasons. So I think when you decide to take something on, I think you have to be honest about what you're taking on, how big it could get. You never really know. It can sometimes grow as you go. But I think you have to be really, look around you and go, have I got a really strong support system in place? Are my friends and family going to be there? If I don't have a support system in my family, do I have a chosen family and friends who can sit with me and listen for hours? Am I making sure I'm not posting where I am on Instagram stories while I'm campaigning? Am I making, you know, all of these practical things, because your safety comes first, and activism can cause you to be slightly unsafe depending on who you are and what you're fighting for. So I think you have to think about that first up, and I think that's a really, really valid question.
Great. Danusha M asks, 18 months is a very short time to change policy and the law. You mentioned that much time was spent trying to push it through Parliament. Can you give an insight into the process in a bit more detail, please? Who wrote the law? How did you get access? Did you engage with your local MP to start with, etc., apart from getting the public engaged?
Yes. So a little bit of, without making this a super long answer, because obviously it's 18 months of work. Started off with the social media campaign and then the public pressure. Packaged all that public interest up, took that to legal firms and talked to law firms about pro bono. So which law firms do pro bono, and would they represent someone? Often they'll only represent you if it's within the public interest. So all of that public pressure I'd got, and all of that noise I'd made around the question of why isn't this sexual assault, by doing TV and all that stuff, and having op-eds written, and all of that was quite honestly Twitter and LinkedIn, finding people, emailing them, annoying them until they wrote about it. All of that noise was created so that, and I ramped it up so that I could possibly go to a law firm and say, look, this is within your interest to represent this, because there are, you know, millions of people interested in it, and you could be the law firm that could change it. There was a bunch of lawyers who got in touch and quite honestly were quite mansplaining and quite like, yeah, no, I've wanted to do this for ages. And I was like, why haven't you then? And then Ryan got in touch and was like, this is great. Whatever you want me to do, this is your thing. I'm here to amplify your voice and provide effectively political literacy for me, because I didn't come from a political background or a law background. I didn't understand politics that well before I went into it. So he schooled me in politics and do the legislation. That was his job. And so the way that the strategy for getting the law amended, because we didn't actually write a new law, we just changed section 67 of the Sexual Offence Act 2003. So the way that we did that was, in Scotland, upskirting has been illegal for a decade, since 2009, 12 years now. I've been saying a decade since the beginning of the campaign, can you tell? It's been 2 years now. So since 2009, so we looked at the Scottish legislation, and then we talked to legal authorities in Scotland about the legislation, how it worked and the language in it. And then we created an amendment to the Sexual Offences Act in England and Wales based on the Scottish legislation, and amended slightly through the consultation with legal authorities in Scotland. And then we went up and down the UK and got the best legal authorities in England to corroborate what we've written. So is this right? Will this work in the way we believe it will work? How is it, you know? And obviously Ryan's a lawyer, so that's his job. Before I actually got Ryan, I worked with a law student on the current law so that I could understand it, because a lot of, you know, politics and a lot of law is very, very difficult for you to understand if you don't come from politics or law background. And so it's very inaccessible for a lot of people to understand and read. Just your average bill is like, you know, 200 pages long, and incredibly hard to consume as a working regular person who doesn't work in politics. So I work with law students, a lovely law student called Tasha, and she helped me figure it out. So, you know, when we talk about the upskirting law, it wasn't just me, you know, it's lots of other people, and I had to use and talk to lots of other people to be able to fill in the gaps of things that I didn't have the learning to do. Like, I just didn't understand it. And so we created that legislation, went to legal authorities in England and Wales, and then we got them to sign effectively, like not an agreement, but kind of a letter that basically said that they corroborated the solution we'd come up with in terms of the legal solution we had. And then we took that to Parliament. The way we got into Parliament was that I contacted my local MP. I sent emails to loads of MPs just so that there was noise, so they'd seen my name and they'd seen me asking. Then I contacted my local MP. I didn't actually get to meet with her, but in the industry of law in London, a lot of MPs used to be litigators or used to be lawyers, and so there's quite a lot of connection between law and politics. Ryan had a connection with one MP, one parliamentarian in Parliament. So we got in that way. And then once we were in, we would arrange meetings with lots of other MPs and just push until they would meet us. And then I would ramp up the public pressure if they wouldn't meet us. And then we would use that to go in and ask them to meet us. And then we just basically had meetings for, 6 months, sort of built an army across all parties, because it has to be cross-party for it to be able to be successful. Otherwise it becomes kind of a Labour issue or a Conservative issue. So that's kind of how we got in short form.
Amazing, thank you very much for that. Sam L asks, 18 months seems like such a short space of time to have something so important changed, but I'm sure at times it felt longer. When times were tough, what/who kept you motivated? How important was your support network?
Yeah, massive. It was massive. 18 months. I think it was actually more than 18 months now that I think back, because I, officially 18 months, the political process, but like the campaign was almost like 22 or something. Mm-hmm. But it felt like 5 years, like it felt never ending. And there were so many times when I wanted to give up. And I don't think it's like bad to admit that. I think I can sit here and be like, yeah, I'd get up every morning and put on my suit and be like, let's go and smash politicians and like nail it like girl boss. Like, no, it wasn't like that at all. It's not like that. That's not realistic. Yeah. I get up knackered and exhausted, and I would be so down so much of the time because I was having conversation after conversation with people who just didn't get it, and I had no assurances that we would finish it. But there was so much pressure on my back because there was hundreds of young girls and hundreds of women who were emailing me saying, oh, good luck and please do it. And I just, and asking me. And so it got really hard at points, and my support system, I shrank my support system. So, I was sort of I was 25 when I started, I'm now 30. And I think in your late 20s anyway, you get to a point where you kind of create the family around you that you need, and maybe some people drop off. And I had friendships where people would ask me like, yeah, but why are you working with Conservatives though? Like, it's just, and it's like, because they're the government. Like, I can't get a law through if I don't work with Conservatives. Yeah. And I'd get people, kind of questioning why I was doing it. And I'd have friends who even just like, you would want to talk about it a lot because, in the same way that if I work in advertising, I'd say, how's your day at work? And I would talk about my day at work. And with this, it was so painful and so emotional that I would want to talk about it with my friends. And you could see people getting bored of it until I did it. And then it was like, they post about me everywhere. But so there were some friends who, not friends, but like acquaintances who made me feel quite bad because of the work I was doing. And I kind of deprioritize those people in a gentle way. I would still go for drinks with them and stuff, but I wouldn't rely on them for support because I couldn't. And I had to be really honest with myself about that. So my support system became my family, my immediate family. I'm really lucky to have a super close, supportive family, and my partner, Geordie, and a few friends who kind of really knew what I was going through. Because also I didn't have a lot of time, and I didn't have a lot of time to explain what I was going through to people and how hard it was. And I didn't really talk about how hard it was until afterwards because I just had to get through it and have the momentum. The other support system that helped was other women who'd been through it. I created like a support system online. And that's what, we don't give social media enough credit for, is that it allows you to create communities where you can build literacy around your experience, and you can kind of erode shame, because we all have a lot of shame around the experiences we've been through because society makes us feel shameful for them. And you can erode that shame by talking about it with other people. I found that was really helpful with all the women who'd shared my stories and the kind of ways they said they'd feel. And, I don't know why I still describe what I was wearing on the day, which I do on events now. I say, it was a really hot day and I was wearing a skirt. Don't know why I still do that. Doesn't matter. So all of these kind of conversations were really helpful, but I think that's kind of the thing that got me through it. I think, when I was like, waking up crying, because my boyfriend would put me in a bath and be like, and Ryan would say, take a day off, because if you take a day off, the law will change a day later. We don't know when it's going to happen, but this is your thing. And so you have to run it. And so when you're not coping, the work doesn't happen. So let's just take some time off. I think it's really important to be honest about how hard these things are. And it's really important to be honest about how much you're going to have to lean on other people, because the image of like the one person who did the amazing thing isn't really the reality. It's because you have lots of people around you carry you through it.
Amazing. So I think that's pretty much all we've got time for, but I would like to ask you if you could share, like, what do you think is like if you could only give people one nugget of advice for starting to campaign and to make change around them, or like what's the easiest thing a person can do to create change, what would that be?
Oh my God, that's like the most hard question.
Oh no.
There's so many things.
Let's try and get something in like 30 seconds.
Practical.
But, yeah.
I think the best way to start is to find loads of people who are doing interesting stuff and support them, sign their petitions, donate to them, go to their rallies, because it can be I did a lot of that before I started the Upskilling campaign. I was doing a lot of that for, 3 years. I was fundraising for things. I was just like that. I like doing that kind of stuff. So find other people and support them, because you'll learn so much from how they do things, and you'll learn so much from their work that by the time you've hit on the thing that you want to work on, whether that's volunteering at a food bank or whether that's changing the law, you'll be in a position of confidence. And that kind of imposter syndrome and that worry and all that will be a bit quelled, because you will have been in the environment, you will have been in the organising space with people who are doing it, and you'll be like, no, I can do this. It's not a stupid idea because I've seen people doing it. So I would say find people, join them and support them first. And that's how you will grow your activism muscle.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Gina. It's been amazing speaking to you. And thank you very much, everybody who sent in a question. We got an absolute load in. And I'm really sorry to everybody who's asked the question that we've not been able to answer today. yeah, thank you again for joining us. To those of you watching at home, thank you to those of you who may be watching this at a later date on Catch Up. And thank you again, Gina. It's been absolutely wonderful speaking to you.
Thank you for sharing, Nyla. It's been great. Thanks for having me.